Welcome everyone to this seemingly last episode of Unlearning the Falsehoods. I guess we are on the 40th episode. I'm calling it last episode because this is the end of the second book in the Bharat trilogy that is written by Sai Deepak. All right. So we'll have to wait for him to finish writing his third book, come out with his third version, then I'll get to reading it, and then when I finish reading it, we'll again resume this series from episode number 41. All right. For those all of you out there who still believe that NCRT history textbooks and all the other private publications out there, if they teach the real history of this geography that we so fondly like to call as Bharat, then you must refer to my series that is Unlearning the Falsehoods. This is in no way an academic exercise for history students. This is simply a video series for commoners like you and me who work a 9 to 5 job but in a way are still interested in the history and the ongoings of this holy land of Bharat. Okay. So, if you are a commoner who works 9 to 5, but you usually find yourself silent in those historic debates, okay, you usually find yourself at loss of words when others are talking about the pride in their nation, in their nationalism, okay, there's a lot about our country that was destroyed in the form of destruction of our places of learning, such as Nalanda and all those places. There is a lot about our country that has been hidden under this layers of misinformation, and both the not both actually all the Western powers and even the Islamic countries are complicit in this exercise of hiding the true information about the history of Bharat. Okay, so like I said, this entire series of Unlearning the Falsehoods is in no way an academic exercise. It is simply an eye opener for you. Okay, doors for you to open and kick them down by your own due diligence, by your own research. Okay, because history as a subject is woven together by multiple threads. You cannot simply just say that I would say at least of Bharat. Okay, other Western countries might have their history written in history that is pretty much clear and distinguishable in the form of black and white. But when it comes to this geography, uh, it's not very simple. Okay. So, on that note, we will begin this last episode. So far, we have established that the Moplah riots indeed take place, and blame inevitably lies on the Muslim side because let's keep it aside for a while that the Moplahs and the individuals who perpetrated such barbaric atrocities on the pagan Moplahs. Okay, let's keep it aside that they belonged to the Muslim faith. Okay, the Muslim League, okay, that claimed to be the mouthpiece of the entire Muslim community, even they were not forthcoming when it came to condemning such incidents. Okay, leave condemning aside. Even they were, blaming the other side. They were blaming the Moplahs for the occurrence of such riots. Right. So this was the condition. Even after the facts were coming out from that place, people were coming out and speaking up. The Congress themselves, okay, there were some leaders who earlier professed to be moderates, but they were convinced that so and so things were done. Okay, but the beacon of non-violence, okay, the national hero, the great soul that goes by the name of Mohandas Gandhi, he was not convinced. No, 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 my Khilafat brothers cannot do things to their pagan brethren and their pagan neighbors. Similarly, the Muslim League wasn't very forthcoming and condemning, even, in principle, conceding the fact that indeed the Moplahs did so and so things. They were in complete denial. They were justifying it based on the Khilafat theologies. Okay, so nobody was exactly forthcoming. And what happened was, like, things that happen in the current contemporary era in Bharat. Whenever something wrong is done to the pagan, it will be layered up with justifications given by the liberals, on top of that justification given by the Muslims, and things will be forgotten, because quite frankly we as a nation have a very, I guess we have a very large memory, but we tend to forget things. Okay. So yes, so the Muslim League, they did not condemn. The Congress moderates, they came out in condemnation. But since Gandhi was the face of Congress at that time, he did not come out in the open and put the blame on the Muslim side. He even stopped short of condemning it. So as usual, the other parts of this geography, that is Bharat, they forgot. You know, very few of people. If you ask any school student about the Moplah riots, they'll say, "What Moplah? We don't know. What Kerala? What happened there?" So this is exactly the reason why I have started with this series, and like again mentioned in the very beginning of this video, this is not an academic exercise. Okay, this is simply a primer for you. These are some doors that I am presenting in front of you. Choose any door that you might like. Do your own due diligence. Explore other sources. Come up with something that you might think, okay, this is something that I have learned out of this. And I think it will add value to your knowledge, to your understanding of your nation. Okay. All right, so there was no action. So this led to the frustration amongst the women, because women usually are the ones who are the most vulnerable when it comes to the population who has been at the receiving end of the atrocities. Women have always been at the receiving end of the Islamic atrocities, be it the medieval age, be it the contemporary age. If you look right now, look at the situation of ISIS and the Yazidi women. Okay, so such has been the case always. All right. Now, since there was no action by the law and order machinery, I have already mentioned this in the previous video, that only thing the only thing that I am grateful and thankful towards the law and order machinery of the British in that very specific place is, at least they were there to document these things. Okay, let's be conservating in our estimates. Let's assume that they were only able to document 10% of the atrocities that were perpetrated. Okay, so that 10% is still a bit too much. Okay. So what happened was, the women, they were frustrated. Why exactly isn't action taking place, even after facing so and so barbaric atrocities, being at the receiving end of all these things? Why aren't actions being taken? So the women of Malabar, what they did was, the viceroy at that time was Reading, who added a prefix of Lord to his name. So he goes by the name of Lord Reading. He was the viceroy, and the women, they had to write a letter to the wife of the viceroy, because since they had come to the understanding that the men, okay, they were not understanding, they were not taking any steps, they were impotent, they were unmasculine, they might have renounced their manhood. So the women had to come forward for writing the letter to the better half of the viceroy, that is Lord Reading. And let's read out word by word what those women have written. These are first hand accounts of the survivors. So let's read it. The humble memorial of the bereaved and the sorrow-stricken women of Malabar. May it please your gracious and compassionate ladyship. We, the Hindu women of Malabar of varying ranks and stations in life, who have recently been overwhelmed by the tremendous catastrophe known as the Moplah Riot, take the liberty to supplicate your ladyship for sympathy and succor. Okay? The mere fact that they had to write to the wife of the viceroy, it itself says that there was no action being taken by the viceroy himself. When would the viceroy take action? When the law and order authorities come up with the proposal. Why weren't the law and order authorities coming up with the proposals? Because they themselves had run for their lives when the atrocities were being perpetrated. Okay, so let's read further in that letter. Your ladyship is doubtless aware that though our unhappy district has witnessed many Moplah outbreaks in the course of last 100 years, these are the women saying, this is not me saying, and we have already established since the 1700s, starting from Hyder Ali, Tipu Sultan, the outbreaks against the pagan neighbors and the pagan natives of this particular place in Malabar was it's a continuum. It's not like it's the Moplah riot in 1921 was a isolated incident. It has been going on. It's just that there was nobody to document these things. So this is women of Moplah speaking, not me. The present rebellion is unexampled in its magnitude as well as unprecedented in its ferocity. But it is possible that your lordship is not fully apprised of all the horrors and atrocities perpetrated by the fiendish rebels, of the many wells and tanks filled up with mutilated, often only half dead bodies of our nearest and dear ones who refused to abandon the faith of our fathers. Here they are talking about the water tanks. Okay, those water tanks were filled with the slaughtered bodies of the people who refused to convert. Okay, so if this was an economic rebellion, if the ends of this so-called rebellion were economic emancipation, they should have stopped at killing the elite. This is again, we are extending the courtesy and liberty of assuming to understand that indeed there was economic downtroddenness due to the elites in the first place. It is based on that assumption, which is clearly not the case. But let's assume, for the sake of argument, that indeed these people, after 6 to 7 centuries of being traders, they were still economically downtrodden. Why did they feel the need to kill people? Because those people refused to accept their faith. Now, why did they feel the need to convert people if they were fighting economic downtroddenness? And which religion were they forcing the others, the pagans, to convert to? These are some questions you must ask. This is the appeal to reason. Nothing happens without any reason. Okay? Let's see what these women had to write further. Nearest and dear ones who refused to abandon the faith of our fathers, of pregnant women cut to pieces and left on the roadsides and in the jungles with the unborn baby protruding from the mangled corpse. There were pregnant women who were slaughtered and they were hung on the trees with the unborn baby being protruding, hanging from the fetus when those bodies of those pregnant women were hanged. These things were done. Okay, not in the 1400s in the medieval era, in the contemporary era, contemporary history of Bharat. Of our innocent and if our innocent and helpless children torn from our arms and done to death before our eyes, meaning their children, they were snatched away from the mothers and they were killed right before the eyes of these women. And of our husbands and fathers tortured, flayed, and burnt alive. The people who refused to convert were burnt alive. Of our hapless sisters, forcibly carried away from the midst of kith and kin and subjected to every shame and outrage which the vile and brutal imagination of this inhuman hellhounds could conceive of. These are the women who are narrating these things, first-hand accounts. Okay, so they were their kith and kin, their cousins, their sisters. Okay, they were snatched away from them, and whatever you can imagine. Okay, those sexual acts, whatever your wildest imagination, you can imagine those things, and those things were done to those women right in front of their mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers. Of thousands of our homesteads reduced to cinder mounds out of sheer savagery and wanton spirit of destruction. Okay, they were roaming around with blades and swords and cutting anything that comes in their way. There was no sense of law. of our places of worship desecrated and destroyed, and of the images of the deity shamefully insulted by putting the entrails of slaughtered cows where flower garlands used to lie. All right, let's talk about this for a moment. If indeed if according to the secular historians and the Marxist historians, if the aim of the Moplah rebellion, according to them, rebellion, I use the word riot and genocide. So, if according to the secular and the Marxist historians, if the idea of this pogrom or the end goal of this pogrom was economic emancipation, what was the need to desecrate the temples? What was the need to defile the idols by garlanding them with the, meat of cow? And why specifically cow? These are the questions that I'm raising. These are appeals to your reason, your sense of reason. Does it make sense to you? Were these people fighting economic downtroddenness or smashed to pieces? Okay, the idols in the temple were smashed to pieces. Why? What did the idols do to keep them, exploit them economically? Something for you to think about. An appeal to your reason. Of the wholesale looting of hard earned wealth of generations, reducing many who were formerly rich and prosperous to publicly beg for a piece or two in the streets of Calicut, to buy salt or chili or betel leaf, rice being mercifully provided by various relief agencies. These are not fables. Okay? I'm reading their words verbatim. I'm not even paraphrasing. These are their words. The letter that was written to the wife of the viceroy, because the men, okay, you can say the Congress, the law and order machinery, the army, all the men had renounced their manhood. So the women had to come forward to write this. The wells full of rotting skeletons, the ruins which were once our dear homes, the heaps of stones which once were places of worship, these were still here to attest to the truth. It was still there while the time of writing this letter. Okay. The cries of our murdered children in their death agonies are still ringing in our ears. Just imagine the situation. Okay, they were butchering people and the people were crying in agony, the last cry of agony to death. It was still ringing inside their ears. And will continue to haunt our memory till death brings us peace. We remember how, driven out of our native hamlets, we wandered starving, naked in the jungles and forests. Okay, they had to run to the forests, run for their lives. Why were they naked? Think of any reason that you can. I'm not going to say anything. But while they were running, they were naked. What need might have been there for them to remove their clothes? Naked in the jungles and forests, we remember how we choked and stifled our babies' cries lest the sound should betray our hiding places to our relentless pursuers. Okay? They had to choke the mouths of their babies, okay, to stop them from crying. Otherwise, the people who were following them, who were bloodthirsty to murder them, okay, and destroy their modesty, they would know their location. So they had to choke their own babies. You should think, okay, what would have been the impulse of a mother to choke her own baby? Why would a mother do that? What would have been the impulse? Think about it. Imagine about it for a moment. We still vividly realize the moral and spiritual agony that thousands of us passed through when we were forcibly converted into the faith professed by these bloodthirsty miscreants. Okay, they still think about the moral and the spiritual agony. So when you forcefully convert somebody, you might have physically converted them, but spiritually they still belong to the faith of their forefathers. Okay, so you might, for appearance's sake, you might have converted them, but spiritually they still belong to the faith of their forefathers. That is what they are saying. If they're still in the agony, the spiritual agony, they might have accepted it because of the fear of their death. Okay, but they haven't really accepted it, not at least wholeheartedly. We still have before us the sight of the unendurable and lifelong misery of those fortunately few of our most unhappy sisters who, born and brought up in respectable family, have been forcefully converted and then married to convict coolies. So first they will forcefully convert them and then they will marry them off. These things still go on in Pakistan and Afghanistan. Okay, so it's not about the location, or since Moplahs were highly volatile and impressionable, it's about the ideology with which they are indoctrinated. Such things still go on in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. Okay, now I need not tell you what one thing is common between these three daughter nations that have come out of Bharat. For 5 long months, not a day has passed without its dread tale of horror to unfold. Your gracious ladyships, distracted memorialists, have endeavored without exaggeration, without setting down aught in malice, to convey at least some idea of the indescribably terrible agonies which they and thousands more of their sisters have been enduring for over 5 months now through this reign of inhuman frightfulness inaugurated and carried on in the name of the Khilafat. Okay, the Moplahs, they were under the impression that they were fighting for the Khilafat. By doing what? Slaughtering people, raping women, destroying temples. They were fighting Khilafat. And the funny part is, the people themselves in Turkey, they wanted democracy, but these people wanted Islamic Caliphate in Turkey. So for that reason, they were killing their pagan neighbors. We have briefly referred, without going into their harrowing details, to our heart rendering tale of dishonor, outrage, rapine, and desolation. But if the past has been one of pain and anguish, the future is full of dread and gloom. We have to return to a ruined and desolated land. Our houses have been burnt or destroyed, many of our breadwinners killed, all of our property looted, our cattle slaughtered. So these people, okay, for subsistence, these families must have kept cattle for its, dairy benefits. So those cattle were slaughtered as well. Repatriation without compensation means for us ruin, beggary, and starvation. Will not the benign government come out to our aid and give us something to help us to begin life anew? We are now asked to settle down as paupers in the midst of the ex- execrable fiends who robbed, insulted, and murdered our loved ones. And now, since they are going back without any reparations, without any money, now they will have to go back and settle down as beggars between these people who themselves have killed their near and dear ones. So imagine enduring all that and still going back to live with those people who have murdered their loves, near and dear ones. Veritable demons, such as hell itself, could not let loose. Many of us shrink from the idea of going back to what there is left of our homes. For though the armed bands and rebels have been dispersed, the rebellion cannot be said to be entirely quelled. It is like a venomous serpent whose spine has been partly broken, but whose poison fangs are still intact, and whose striking power, if diminished, has not yet been destroyed. A few thousand of rebels have been killed and a few more thousands have been imprisoned. But as the government are only too well aware, many more thousands of rebels, looters, savagely militant evangelists, and other inhuman monsters yet remain at large. Okay, they are still even talking about evangelists as well. So, on the one hand, these pagans faced a threat of forceful killing or conversion. On the other hand, there were also evangelists, Christians, who were making efforts to convert them. This is in contemporary history, not in the medieval era we are talking about. And a few in concealment, but most moving about with arrogance, openly threatening reprisals on all non Muslims who dare to return and resume possession of their property. So there were people who were threatening them that if you come back, you will face similar fate. Many refugees who went back have paid for their temerity with their lives. So, even if there were some people who were convinced, okay, now that things have calmed down, let us go back. So, those people mustered up courage and went back, only to never return. In fact, repatriation, if it is not to be a leap from the frying pan into the fire, must mean for the vast bulk of your ladyship's impoverished and helpless memorialists and their families a hard, inexorable problem of financial help and adequate protection against renewed hellish outrages, from which immunity would be utterly impossible as long as thousands of men and even women and children of this semi savage and fanatical race, in whom the worst instinct of earth, hunger, bloodlust, and rapine have been awakened to fierce activity, are free to prey upon their peaceable and inoffensive neighbors who, let it be most respectfully emphasized, because of their implicit trust in the power and the will of a just and benign government to protect them, had suffered their own art and capacity for self defense to emasculate and decay. Okay, I agree this is a very complex sentence, but let me just break it down for you. Here, the women are saying that the reason why we suffered was because we gave up our arms, we gave up our weapons, we had entrusted this responsibility to the authority being the British, that they will come at the moment of need. And hence, we gave up our arms, we surrendered our right to self defense to the authority. And guess what happened? The authority disappointed. Similar is the case in the contemporary Bharat. Okay, if there is an emergency right now at your doorsteps and people have come to kill or slaughter and plunder your resources, the state will not arrive only up until it's too late. That is the reality that we live in. So, this is the women of Moplah saying, okay, we died, our people near and dear ones fell to such, earth hunger, bloodlust, and rapine. These fiendish savages, we had to get killed by them. Why? Because we surrendered our right to self defense to the authority. And guess what? Authority, they themselves ran to save their lives. Again, these ladies go on further to write, we, your ladyship's humble and sorrow stricken memorialists, do not seek vengeance. Now, these women are not talking about vengeance, they are not seeking of revenge. Our misery will not be rendered less by inflicting similar misery upon this barbarous and savage race. Our dead will not return to us if their slayers are slaughtered. We would not be human. However, if we could ever forget the cruel and shameful outrages and indignities perpetrated upon us by a race to whom we have always endeavored to be friendly and neighborly, we would be hypocritical if, robbed of our all possessions, we did not plead for some measure of compensation to help us out of the pauperism now forced upon us. So they were requesting this wife of the viceroy to at least give them some compensation for the troubles that they have faced. That's what they're saying. We do not seek revenge. Our actions will not be motivated by the sentiment of vengeance. We simply need some compensation to resume our life, with a semblance of dignity after suffering so much at the hands of these, Muslim, barbaric, fiendish savages. We would be imbecile if, knowing the ungovernable antisocial propensities and the deadly religious fanaticism of the Moplah race, we did not entreat the just and powerful government to protect the lives and honor of your humble sisters who have to live in a rabble ravaged zone. Our ambition, after all, is low enough. Sufficient compensation to save us and our children from starvation, and enough military protection against massacre and outrage are all that we want. We beseech your compassionate ladyship to exercise all the benevolent influence that you possess with the government to see that our humble prayers are granted. But if the benign government does not consider it possible to compensate us and to protect us in our native land, we would most fervently pray that free grants of land may be assigned to us in some neighboring region which, though less blessed with the lavish gifts of nature, may also be less cursed by the cruelty and brutality of man. So, in effect, they were asking for some sort of compensation to enable them to restart their life with a semblance of dignity. Okay, they are saying that these memories will haunt them to, you know, right up until the moment of their death, and they will only be able to escape from this misery through death. All right. Now, what does this tell you? Why do our textbooks hide these things? Is there a specific agenda to be fulfilled by hiding these things? That is again an appeal to your reason. I'm not here to sit in judgment of what happened in the past. Then, I will be recipient of the criticism that you are inciting hate against the Muslims. No, that is not what I'm advocating. I'm surely not advocating for holding the current generation of the Muslims accountable for what their predecessors did. I'm simply drawing out a parallel. What was the situation years ago in the name of political discourse? Now, all these things have been conveniently denied by the Muslim League leaders. Some have gone to the extent of even blaming the pagan neighbors for their situation. Okay, and to this very day, we see a similar political discourse in our public life. Okay, denial and justification. And the sad part is, and the sad reality is, people from the pagan fold have joined forces with the Muslims in justifying these deeds. You see, these protests in the JNU, all for want of some clout on social media. They will conveniently switch sides and stand against their pagan brethren. It is what it is. Okay. If you still want to, read further on this issue, um, you know, Dr. Bhavi Sakhpal, yes, that's his real name, Dr. Bhavi Sakhpal. He later on would be known by the name of Bhimrao Ambedkar. He has written a book that is Pakistan or Partition of India. He has, I would say, written quite extensively and elaborate about these Moplah riots in his book. So you should look into this book. Okay. All right, that's all for this series right now, at least. That is the unlearning the falsehoods. Keep in mind, all along this series, all along these 40 episodes, you will find things that on the face of it might sound communal. That on the face of it might sound that it is an incitement to hatred, but that it's not that. Let me assure you, the purpose of this entire series is not to blame the working class Muslims, the contemporary Muslim people who contribute to the society. Okay, this is about in principle accountability for barbaric things that were perpetrated on the pagans, for which there is no historical accountability. Forget accountability, there is even no acknowledgement. There are people who are still living in denial that these things have happened. All right, so that is the whole purpose. We will again resume this series of unlearning the falsehoods when Sai Deepak comes out with his another book. Again, a reminder for people. I would really recommend you to read this book, not for the narrative that Sai Deepak has written in this book, but for the sake of the sources that he has quoted in this book, and you will be exposed to a vast treasure trove of literary sources that previously, at least I did not knew that existed. There are first-hand accounts of Westminster Parliament. There are first-hand accounts of legislative debates. There are first-hand accounts of leaders of the Muslim League saying things. There are first-hand accounts of the debates of the annual Congress assemblies that they were organizing up until from 1885 to 1947, when there was transfer of power. Okay, so read this book. Preferably get exposed to these sources and do your own due diligence and come up with your own explanation and satisfy your own appeal to reason. Okay, move away from the appeal of ignorance that our history textbooks has so far asked us to do. Okay, We have been, living under this ignorance since centuries. Now is the time. Now is, the time to dawn the era of reason. Right? Thank you for watching this series.